Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Faith and Fire. This is episode 4. My name is Juan Carlos, a combat veteran, husband, father, and a Catholic just trying to continue to find his way. In our last episode, I opened the door to what it was like coming back from my first deployment and multiple deployments after that. You know, the initial shock, the disconnection, just silence, That wasn't the end of the story. If anything, that was really the beginning. Today I want to go a little deeper. How I took things right, wrong, or indifferent. It's kind of funny because a lot of us soldiers, and anybody that really, it's not just have to be a soldier, but anybody that survives and continues to survive traumatic events, that gets lodged in your brain. And one of the things that I know I did was I turned a lot to alcohol. It was the one thing that didn't change, right? We came back, obviously, kids were older, learning, you missed a lot. You also missed a lot of I missed a lot of the growth of my wife, right? She, went from, her and I doing everything together and, with the kids, everything together to, she had to learn how to do everything, by herself, from paying the bills to getting the groceries to taking care of the house to, being, mother and father to, at the time was two great kids. They're still great kids, but at the time, two smaller kids. And so I remember coming back and, it was, for me, faith wasn't really there. Yeah, our kids, I think, at the time, started, I think it was, I don't know if it was after or before my second deployment, but, started doing their catechism classes for First Communion, and we would go to church, and we would make sure that they would go to their faith formation classes and things of that nature, but it was just a thing to do. But one of the things that I turned to was alcohol, and it was quite a bit. How does it start out, right? I need to drink, I need to wind down, blowing off some steam, getting some space, but it took a while. I started using alcohol to blur the sharp edges, not being present. There was a shame of feeling out of place with my own family. But the biggest thing was the fear of being vulnerable again. When you go to combat, no matter how well you do and how well you perform in combat, there's a point in time where, there were some pretty hairy situations, where you don't think that, when you walk out of there and, you get done with a patrol, a mission or something, and it doesn't go as according to plan, and you walk back and you're literally walking back and nothing's physically wrong with you. It still doesn't mean that you weren't vulnerable at that point in time. And alcohol took a lot of that edge off for me. Unfortunately, it didn't come crashing down overnight. It was subtle. Again, a drink at night to sleep, another on weekends to feel something, and then I just started with the excuses. And I think that the problem is at that point in time, if you served during that time, and it's probably the same for other folks, with long extended periods of deployment, you knew that if you stayed in, you were going to go again. And so a lot of us just refocused on the next mission. I think it was shortly after we came back from OIF 1 that most of us knew if we stayed there, we were going to go again within 10 months, 11 months, something like that. I think it ended up being like 13 months. I think it was like October, November of 2005. The division deployed again back to Iraq. I was with a different brigade at the time, but it was still the same, right? We have to train, get ready to go, train and get ready to go. And it started feeling comfortable. I think that, you know, when you, I think that's the weird thing, right? Is when you feel more comfortable getting ready to go back to potential conflict and combat versus staying home with your family. Where it was a little uncomfortable. Not necessarily the questions or, what did you do when you were over there? But, really it's like once you've been over there once, it's not that you seek it. It's just becomes comfortable. All the training that we've had to prepare ourselves to deploy, all of the camaraderie, the brotherhood, doing it for those that never came back, just trying to do it right, became very comfortable. And unfortunately with that also, drinking for me became very comfortable. And it was just one of those things that took me years and years to realize that it was actually hurting me more than anything. And I think after a while, with the alcohol, I knew it was hurting me, but it was something that, again, just like going back to another deployment, started becoming more and more comfortable. It became more and more of ended up being a crutch. It's like we always joke around. I mean, you don't need water, it's a crutch. You don't need food, it's a crutch. But of course, I think at the end of the day now, I think if you go, all you need now is some Motrin and some water, and you're going to be okay. But back then it was you need a beer, you need to drink some whiskey, et cetera, right? And it was the cool thing to do. It's what we did. I trained hard, worked hard when we deployed, but of course, drank a lot when we came back. And so it was weird, it was weird, but getting back to the mission first, everything else second, the mission always comes first, right? That was the one thing that we were taught, especially once we started deploying. The mission came first. I know now that, God comes first, and then my wife, and children, then my work. And it's different, and I don't know if I would have been any different, had I thought of this, sooner or understood this sooner. But I think it's hard, right? Because when we got orders again to deploy, I was excited. I mean, I'm ashamed to say it now. I mean, I was excited to leave my family to go back to combat, and that's, to me, it's hard to sit here and think about. When you think about it now, I have 3 amazing children. I got just an amazing wife. But 15, 20 years ago, I was excited to leave them, to go to combat. I mean, it doesn't make sense today. But to me, it made sense then. I don't know why it made sense. I don't know how it made sense, but I didn't hesitate. Packed my bags. My faith felt far away. It was just a memory of childhood. I didn't pray like I used to. I mean, I didn't even feel worthy of prayer. I mean, I figured that, it doesn't mean I didn't pray, but it was more out of habit than it was out of reverence, out of adoration. And so, the mission became everything. It was, and that's the worst thing is I felt I was doing the right thing. That was my job. I was providing for my family. I was providing, what do you call that? Doing my job, doing my service to my country. I would find out later that it obviously was a disservice to my family. It was, the wear and tear that took on my children and my wife. obviously was not good, and so by the grace of God and having an amazing wife and amazing children, I'm, still, we're still going through this life together. But that's the whole thing. It's like it was hard not to, not feel numb. It was like it became a thing. Then it came back after a year from there, and was fortunate enough to go to another unit in Germany, and thought it was going to be a 3 years of relaxing, and but no, it wasn't. I think after a year and a half, I ended up going to Afghanistan. And again, it was the same thing. The only thing different there was the drinking was more often. The drinking started to become every day. And it was a little more than just a couple of beers here and some whiskey there. It really started to become, I didn't realize how much I had drinking. But ready to deploy, ready to go, thinking that I'd have a rock star of a family and everything was going to be okay. I think back now to the deployments with my family, and it's a lot of that was it was hard on them. It was, and that's the whole thing. I didn't take it as hard on me. I mean, I felt bad, leaving, but that was the job, and hindsight being 2020, I don't think I would have done things the same. I always tell people that I would, join the Army all over again, but not sure if, I would have been so focused on the mission as opposed to being focused on the family. And those decisions may have been different, may not have been different. But I mean, we can always play Monday morning quarterback and figure it out. But, this is just how I chose to live my life. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Knowing now for me it was wrong, just wanting to go. And the effects that it had on my family, I can only imagine. I can only imagine what they went through when I wasn't there. Their thoughts of, phone calls or knocks on the door. I can only imagine what went through their mind. And so it's got to be pretty scary. And so I think that when you think about that, when you come home and you get numb, you start drinking alcohol, and you start deprioritizing your family and that reunion and what that means to them, it's a discredit to the rock stars that really held it down while we were gone. Our families were very instrumental. Always thought about us, even though we were mission first and mission focused and ready. But our families were always there for us and praying for us, only wanting the best for us, and of course wanting us to make it home. And for a lot of us, we did get to come home. Some of us physically never made it home, unfortunately. But those of us that came home, we didn't fully come home, as I said in the last episode. And we put up barriers and boundaries and, to keep things separated. But what that did was it just made us distant. It made us distant from the ones that we loved, the ones that were there for us. And so I think that's, when I started drinking and, really getting to the point where I couldn't control it, that was just a big discredit to my family. who wanted to be there for me, who was there for me, with open arms, no questions asked, happy that I was home. And I didn't realize it at the time. I realize it now, obviously, how fortunate I am to am, and will be to have the family that I have. And so, yeah, it's hard. I know that I've been rambling on for the last 15, 20 minutes, but I think it's hard to talk about this because it's like half the time I don't remember. I drank myself into a stupor, one thing didn't go right. If I wasn't deployed, I was drinking. Something went right, it's time to celebrate. I was drinking. And so, it was like, that's what we did. And I can tell you that, probably about 10 years ago, actually probably less than that, probably about 5 years ago, I had already been out about 5 years, been retired about 5 years. And that's when the drinking really started to get out of control. There was no formations to go to. There was just a job to go to. And, I started drinking heavily in excess. Blackout drunk. I would get so blackout drunk, I don't remember what I did. And I remember one time, I think, I don't know if it was a disagreement or something didn't go right. But I remember drinking a fifth of whiskey in the garage. And I think after that fifth, I looked and I found a fifth of vodka or something. And I started drinking that. And that was probably, it wasn't the last time I touched alcohol, obviously, but that's when I realized that I had problems. And that's when I realized that I needed to really tone it down. And very fortunate to still be married, very fortunate to, still be with my family. And I think that's just with, that was God, helping me, keeping me alive, not letting me die of alcohol poisoning, not letting me drink myself to death. And, and now, shortly after that, we moved back to San Antonio, and that's really when I had my encounter, with Jesus at this retreat, and really understood that I have a lot more to do, whether that's to continue to mentor my family or mentor other veterans or mentor other people that made it through trauma, to show them that there is another way, right? We don't all have to live the same way and have the same traumatic outcomes based off our traumatic experiences. And so, it's tough, the silence, the shame, all the scotch, the storm that we've lived through. I think that's one of those things that it's easy for me to talk about now, but if someone were to ask me a couple of years ago, hey, do you want to have a drink? Or a few years ago, I'd be like, absolutely. Knowing that, it's not good for me. And then you just read the studies, right? If you want to be healthy, alcohol is not a healthy thing, the life that we lived, the cigarettes, the chewing tobacco, the beer after work, the whiskey on the weekends, was probably not the best life for us. Yeah, were we all pretty much physically fit? Sure. Could we all go run 2 miles in less than, 14, 15 minutes? Absolutely. Can we do 100 push-ups in 2 minutes? Yes. Can we do 100 sit-ups? Yeah, of course. We were physically fit. Most of us were mentally strong, but obviously I was not as mentally strong as I thought I was, because if I let alcohol take over my life and not realize the signs of, failing as a husband and as a father, definitely, I was not mentally strong, and I'm getting better at it, every day. One of the things that when I look at scripture, I think it's it's interesting, right? Because we always used to put the mission first, and things of that nature. But I think that one of the things that I think about is, I think it's Matthew 6 verse 33. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And that to me is just, showing that, putting God first and your faith and your trust in God. Everything else will be there. It might not be now. It could be soon, could be a little while later, but it's just having that faith and being grounded in that faith. That's, seeing that, I realized how upside down my priorities had been at the time, that I had sacrificed peace for duty and family for control of situations that I really couldn't control, But now I know that God is faithful. He restores. He's not offended by our distance. He actually closes the gap to us, I wish I'd have known then what I know now. That being a good husband, a good man doesn't mean being distant even though I'm there, being absent even though I'm there. And that putting God first doesn't make you soft. It actually makes you strong enough to love. And so, and if you're listening, if you made something else your mission, whether it's work, status, control, or even your trauma, I want you to know this. It's not too late to reprioritize. God's not done with you. Your family still needs you. In your faith, it's not as far as it feels. Continue to put in the work. If golf is your outlet, play a little golf. If lifting weights is your outlet, continue to do that. Continue to do the things that make you feel good. Continue to spend the time with the loved ones, that you have. Make a reconnection, with somebody that you love, and that loves you. Try to reconnect. It's one of those things that is hard, right? I'm always trying to be better, and so I think that, like I said, God's not done with you. Heck, I ain't done with you. If you need anything, always feel free to reach out. Until next time, stay grounded in your, your thoughts and in your faith, in the grace that's brought you this far. I really appreciate you all listening. I hope you all have a amazing week, and be safe out there in them streets. Until next time.